are not terrorizing this nation. We are helping it thrive. Somalis have always seen themselves as a fabric of this nation. So not only are we not going anywhere, we are not going to allow anybody to make us feel less Minnesotan or less American.
Let me give you a little life lesson to take with you for the rest of your lives. Whenever you see the mainstream media, ultra left-wing politicians, and all of the people who are absolutely the worst humanly possible on the online left rally around a group of people, rally around a specific cause, call out right-wing grifters for allegedly spreading evil white racism, 9 times out of 10, what you're actually going to see when you investigate that particular story is exactly what is going on in the state of Minnesota, where the very Somali community that all these different people are running defense from, talking about how they're the cornerstone and the backbone of the United States of America, are engaged in a massive, insane fraud that, by the way, we keep uncovering more and more instances of that they don't want to talk about. But guess what? We are not dictated to by the left-wing media, by the mainstream media. So what we're going to do is delve into this autism scam that was being run mostly by Somalis in the state of Minnesota. And we're also going to talk about reports and government officials apparently confirming these reports that this money is going to an Al-Qaeda offshoot in Somalia. It's absolute madness in every possible way. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel by giving me non-fraudulent money over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
A lot of money there, and that same type of fraud Kirsten just told us about is exactly what led to an unprecedented crackdown in the state's autism program. Yesterday, 5 investigators revealed 85 autism centers in Minnesota are now under investigation.
Take a look at this graph showing the explosion in this program. This is the amount of money the state has paid in Medicaid claims to autism treatment providers using your tax dollars. You can see in 2017, not that much, just more than $1 million. But you see the gradual growth here. In 2021, more than $80 million. But look at last year, more than $220 million paid out in claims with a grand total of just shy of $700 million. This is what state investigators are now looking at, these soaring costs, and questioning how many providers are doing real work.
So one of the most astounding things about Somali fraud in the state of Minnesota is that when you look into the numbers associated with these schemes, what you ultimately end up discovering is that Somalis absolutely have no chill at all whatsoever. You just saw right there that back in 2017, before a bunch of these Somalis set up these autism clinics in order to bilk Medicaid for hundreds of millions of dollars, that the total that the Medicaid program was spending on this particular issue was about $1.2 million. And again, this is for the whole state of Minnesota. But fast forward just a couple of years into the year 2024, and they're spending over 200 times the amount of money on children with autism. And coincidentally, and by the way, when I say coincidentally, I mean absolutely not coincidentally, this is after a bunch of Somalis set up clinics in order to suck up this Medicaid money. And if this sounds familiar, it absolutely should. We've done multiple videos on this channel about a Medicaid housing scheme that, of course, a bunch of Somalis were defrauding, about another Medicaid housing scheme that Somalis were defrauding from the very same office building, if you guys can remember that, and of course, the Feeding Our Future fraud, which was also perpetuated by Somalis that, again, were pretending to feed starving children during COVID-19, and this was actually the largest COVID-19 funding fraud in the entire country. And again, if you guys are unaware of the connections to Governor Tim Walz, the founders and a bunch of people who were indicted associated with Feeding Our Future were actually pictured with Governor Tim Walz. And by the way, they also donated to Ilhan Omar, who has been on the defense for the Somali community, claiming that they're just innocent Baba Angel Aladdins and you guys just happen to be evil white racists for noticing that they're stealing all of your money and, of course, buying luxury goods, buying boats, buying massive properties, luxury cars, and, of course, in addition to all that, apparently funneling money to Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda offshoot in Somalia.
It makes me sad for the families.
Dr. Eric Larson has dedicated his life to helping families with autism, running LaVos Institute Midwest here in Minneapolis. He even helped the state stand up its autism program a decade ago.
The only reason we're delivering services is because families worked so hard over the past 30 years to develop this program.
But now that program is in the crosshairs of state investigators. As 5 Investigates first reported, 1 in 5 autism centers in the state is now under an investigation.
So as you can see, this fraud is absolutely massive. They are reporting that 1 in 5 of the clinics that offer these autism services are in fact under investigation right now at this moment. And I believe that's in and around 90 of these such offices. And the crazy thing is that when you look into this, what you ultimately end up finding is the same pattern of behavior. Sketchy offices that don't exist, numbers that go to nothing. When you look at their websites, they don't even edit out the insert caption here. They have stock images of fake doctors and fake medical personnel. And of course, what we end up finding through the indictments is that many of these Somalis were running schemes where they essentially went to parents, offered them kickbacks in order to use their kids' social security numbers to draw in this massive Medicaid money in one of the most massive frauds in the history of the state of Minnesota. Yet another fraud perpetuated by the Somali community under the watch of Tim Walz.
How do you explain that big of a number of open investigations?
Yeah, there was such a high need for autism services in Minnesota when the state began offering it that it's an unlicensed service. So there aren't the same structures in place.
And I also want to point out that that statement right there where this local representative said that demand for these services was so high once it was being offered is completely untrue, ridiculous, and absurd, because as you could see at the beginning of this whole process, we're only talking about $1 million to a couple of $1 million, and suddenly we jumped to over $200 million for this particular project, again, on an annual basis. It doesn't make any sense. It should be a red flag to everyone, but the thing is, fraud is a way of life, and the Somalis know exactly what to do, and they learn this from people like Ilhan Omar, who is making the case that evil white racism is behind all criticism of the Somali community, all criticism of her, Islamophobia, all of those different various things, because guess what? There were red flags, obviously, in the amount of children of Somali descent who reportedly had autism all over the place, and even the Minnesota Department of Education was looking into this. However, they were threatened into silence by these scammers who said that they would come out strong and label them evil white racists. In addition to that, one of the things that we find out on appeal from the cases where we actually get convictions is that they are making the case that there is bias in the jury due to evil white racism. So let me break down exactly what's going on in the Somali community, because they're using the fear of being called an evil white racist against said community to bilk the taxpayer for hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. So these people come to the United States largely as refugees. Now, of course, there's a bunch of second generation Somalis that are in the United States of America as well, but if they are not refugees themselves, typically their parents got in on a similar type status, and they use that fast track to US citizenship to embed themselves in our nation. Then, in addition to that, because they come from one of the most corrupt kleptocracies in the entire world, they then participate in the very same behavior that made their governments completely unfunctional back in Somalia. They deprive the taxpayer through fraud of all these different various monies, and then when people start to get suspicious of this obvious pirate-like behavior that we see is typical of these Somali communities, they start labeling you evil, white, and racist for noticing, and this causes people within the Democratic Party and within the Tim Walz administration to back off on the investigations until they steal so much and they're driving around in such nice cars and live in such large houses that eventually the dam breaks and the local news media ends up finding this out, reporting it to the public, and then the federal charges end up dropping. So time and time again, this is the pattern. And by the way, they got Ilhan Omar trotting her ass out there each and every day talking about how Somalis basically founded the United States of America.
Somalis are not terrorizing this nation. We are helping it thrive. Somalis have always seen themselves as a fabric of this nation.
Which is false, ridiculous, absurd, and insane. Somalis have nothing to do with the founding of the United States of America. They are a very small minority in the United States of America, and in addition to that, where they represent a significant portion of the population is in the state of Minnesota, and guess what? That's where they're committing all the fraud.
DHS says it stepped up enforcement late last year, around the time the feds raided these two clinics suspected of billing the state more than $20 million for services never provided.
I was never thinking somebody is going to submit fake bills.
Larson says he only started to get suspicious last year.
So this is what happens when you have a high trust society that has a high trust culture. They end up having to struggle with the learning curve when they start importing a low trust society's population, who again descend from a kleptocracy and want to import those values along with them. You get dumbass, ridiculous statements like this, where the guy says, I never would have thought people would have done wrongful billing in terms of this autism program. This autism program is so sacred, honorable, and noble. And again, this guy just does not get it in a number of reasons. First and foremost, bad billing practices, overbilling, duplicative billing is the number one scam in Medicare and Medicaid. The idea that this idiot was watching the store and he was like, I never would have imagined that the most common type of crime that happens in the thing that I'm overseeing could possibly happen in the thing that I'm overseeing should really lead to his firing, because the guy's an absolute idiot. But then, in addition to that, when you have these Somalis that again are doing this over and over and over again, specifically to the Medicaid program, specifically to programs involving children, involving the vulnerable, involving all sorts of people in the state of Minnesota that can't advocate for themselves, this guy is just like, oh, well, there's no way that those people from a kleptocracy that have kleptocracy-like values would actually do the things that ruin their country, you know, the kleptocracy that they came from. I can't even imagine that. And then eventually he started calling the numbers because these people are so brazen about their scams, they don't even bother to have anybody answering the phone because they don't even want to have the superficial things that would indicate that they're running a legitimate business.
When he and his staff tried calling providers in the state directory, he couldn't reach at least 100 of them.
No apparent email address, no website, nobody answering the phone.
Red flag, you think?
Well, they're certainly not trying to deliver services.
So I don't know why this guy is laughing. He's an absolute idiot. Again, this scam was going on for years. The autism program had inflated spending year after year, and he's like, last year I tried calling them, tried emailing them, and I guess they're not interested in providing services. Again, when did we actually import all of the doctors and the medical staff and the insurance people from the nation of Somalia? When did that actually happen? Never in this country. What we did was bring in a bunch of refugees, in part due to the fact that they have radical groups like Al-Shabaab in their country that are destabilizing their government, in the hopes that we could resettle them here and they could contribute to this nation. But guess what? Not only are they not contributing, they're actually extracting money through fraud. But in addition to that, according to Homeland Security at the federal government and a report out of City Journal, they're funneling that money back to Al-Shabaab to further destabilize the country.
Federal prosecutors say Minnesota is grappling with one of the biggest welfare fraud waves in U.S. history. And now counterterrorism officials warn some of that money very likely ended up in the pockets of Al-Shabaab, an al-Qaeda-linked terror group operating out of Somalia.
Which creates more refugees to come to the United States of America to steal from us even more, to fund that group even more, so that way we could end up with this vicious cycle of Somali importation. Now, of course, a bunch of temporary protective status has been ended for Somalis in the United States of America. That's a good thing. They need to go back. Again, if they're funding them either directly or indirectly with the money that they're sending back to their home country, then yes, they need to go back to said home country. The idea that we're going to fund a refugee crisis just so we could import the refugees is absolutely insane. And then when you stack on top of that, that they're stealing the money in order to fund it, it creates a vicious cycle, and I want no part of it. But the thing is, this is par for the course in Minnesota. And again, we are just at the tip of the iceberg of the scams that these people are running, because make no mistake about it, one of the common things that we notice from these scammers is that they're constantly receiving awards from Governor Tim Walz for entrepreneurial spirit. They're constantly giving campaign contributions to him, to, of course, Ilhan Omar, to Jacob Fry, to Jacob Fry's opponent, Omar Fatah. So yeah, they're infiltrating the government. They are making this a greater and greater possibility as the days go by. and Tim Walz's little fake crackdown before he runs for his third term so he has a chance at being president of the United States should not fool anyone. And by the way, if you're in the state of Minnesota, look at what Democratic rule has brought you. Disaster after disaster after disaster.
Is the biggest funder of Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-linked terror group in Somalia, actually the Minnesota taxpayer? A federal investigator says yes. An alarming claim first reported by City Journal, which spoke with multiple former federal agents. The U.S. Attorney's Office has charged dozens of defendants across multiple schemes, including housing aid fraud, pandemic child nutrition fraud, and false billing for autism therapy. In total, prosecutors say these schemes have cost Minnesota taxpayers billions of dollars.
Still, there are people that have legitimately could use those resources that are not getting those resources. It's past criminal.
Minnesota is home to one of the country's largest Somali communities. Former state fraud investigator Keish Magan, himself a Somali American, wrote last year that it's uncomfortable and true that nearly all defendants in these major fraud cases come from that community.
And by the way, if you're one of those people who are trying to talk up Somalia, talk about how they built civilization, as ridiculous as that sounds, yes, this is the thing that is going on the internet.com in order to embrace them, to talk about how Mogadishu is older than the United States of America, and therefore it's better than the United States of America, then feel free to catch the first plane ticket over there, because if you like it so much, if it's such a paradise, why are we taking refugees from there and then letting them steal from us? Why are they living off the largesse of our welfare system here and abroad if they're such a paradise? Again, these people undercut their own narratives, talking about how Somalia, we need to take the refugees because they're so deserving, but in addition to that, Somalia is amazing, and the Somali people are the greatest contributors to the United States of America. You know, they do studies on this. You know, they actually track who contributes and who doesn't contribute, and we have numbers out of the European Union, and what we find out is that Somalis are among the lowest contributors. In fact, they're net negative contributors, costing around 315,000 euros per Somalis, which in US dollars is $365,000, again, for the asylum seeker, for the refugee, for the innocent Baba angel that we are importing throughout the course of their entire life. Why are we bringing these people here? Just so Ilhan Omar can call us all evil white racists from our own halls of Congress? Are you insane? Get the hell out of here. And again, if you want to solve this problem, the next time you have a Somali-led corporation that has no experience, no office space, no actual connection to the medical programs that they're promising to provide, and a website that, again, they don't even change out the stock images of, and they submit an application to the state to receive federal government money through the Medicaid program, which again is run and administered by the state, this is the reaction that they should be greeted with.
Like, no, we're not doing that. That's embarrassing.
Again, it is insane that we allowed these people into our country. We provided them a guest status, protective status, and this is how they treat us. And then they have the audacity to come out publicly and say that we're the bad people for noticing their crimes and busting them up. There was actually video from a press conference where the police chief for Minneapolis basically apologized to the Somali community for indicting criminal members of the Somali community.
The Somali community here in Minneapolis has been welcoming and has shown love towards me, and I appreciate it. Over the last 3 years, we have been working together to try and address some of the real serious problems that we have in our community. We have to be honest at times with the problems that we're having in our community, and we need our community to help us fix those problems together because it's real and it's serious. At the same time, if people have taken anything that I have said out of context in a way that's caused harm, I apologize, and I'm sorry for that, because that's not my intention at all.
You know what? I've actually praised this police chief because he basically went into an impossible situation post the George Floyd incident, came from the state of New Jersey, so he's a Northeastern guy, and he's built like Colossus from the X-Men. But no, absolutely not. I do not respect in any way, shape, or form you apologizing for doing your job, going after these Somali thugs and criminals. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the madness of allowing the Somalis to defraud us. Till next time.